a lot of these innovations are introduced as medical innovations, and then they're repurposed.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is a problem. I mean, like Neuralink, for instance, and there are some technologies that enable people to move limbs that they couldn't move before. And obviously everybody would support that. But I think we just need to be very careful about the sort of smoke screen sometimes of a medical innovation, which is then used to justify something else. So I think we need to understand what the overall motivation is of the people who are bringing in these kind of innovations, and also think creatively about how we can interface with technology and apps and so on. I mean, the apps for meditation, there's all sorts of different apps which are positive, but there's no real substitute for human live interaction.
Welcome to Caritas Consciousness Project. I'm Gloria Coelho, and Caritas is dedicated to promoting the evolution of consciousness as the key to individual growth and global healing. In addition to our online presentations with guest speakers, we offer classes and study groups also online. And we draw from a wide assortment of both ancient wisdom and leading edge studies in science, consciousness, spirituality, and philosophy. We're now in our 20th year. We started in 2003, November 2003, at our center in Boulder, Colorado. However, in 2020, with the pandemic, we went all virtual and began recording our presentations on Zoom, which was a great idea because now they're on YouTube and also on our website, and you can view them in both places. Our YouTube channel is Caritas Consciousness Project. Our website is caritascenter.org. As a nonprofit organization, we do rely on the support of our members and donors to keep our program going. So if you'd like to support us, you can make a donation or become a member on our website. And now let me introduce our guest speaker. Let me just get in front of me. David Lorimer is a writer, lecturer, poet, editor, and spiritual activist who's a founder of Character Education Scotland, program director of the Scientific and Medical Network, and former president of Reckon Trust and the Swedenborg Society. He's also been editor of Paradigm Explorer since 1986 and completed his 100th issue in 2019. He was the instigator of the Beyond the Brain conference series in 1995 and has coordinated the Mystics and Scientists conferences every year since the 1980s. Originally a merchant banker and then a teacher of philosophy and modern languages at Winchester College, he's the author and editor of over a dozen books, including Survival, Death as Transition, Resonant Mind, The Spirit of Science, Thinking Beyond the Brain, The Protein Crunch, and A New Renaissance, which I just finished yesterday, and it's wonderful, which he edited with Oliver Robinson. He has edited 3 books about the Bulgarian sage Bensadono, Peter Dunoff, who is just an inspiration to read. So the 3 books on Peter Dunoff are Prophet for Our Times, The Circle of Sacred Dance, and Gems of Love. which is a translation of his prayers and formula into English formulas. His book on the ideas and work of the Prince of Wales, who is now the King of the UK, called Radical Prince, has been translated into Dutch, Spanish, and French. And there is a chapter in this book, in the New Renaissance, by King Charles. His most recent books are his essays, A Quest for Wisdom, and his collection of poetry called Better Light a Candle. David is also chair of the Galileo Commission, which seeks to expand the evidence base of science of consciousness beyond a materialistic worldview. In 2020, he was awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award as a visionary leader by the Visioneers International Network and the 2021 Aboca Human Ecology Prize. He's a creative member of the Club of Budapest. And in 2023, he was created Global Ambassador by the Scientific and Medical Network in recognition of his longstanding contributions. His website is davidlorimer.co.uk. Welcome, David, and thank you so much for making the time in this busy week of yours to be with us.
Thanks so much, Gloria. So I will just share my screen. Before I do so, I just wanted to say that I was just telling Gloria, and the country people among you will enjoy this, that this afternoon was the Saturday in October when the cows come down from the mountains. And so we've had 100+ cows going past our house, with their bells ringing, coming down from the mountains into their winter pastures. And obviously they go the other way in the spring. So twice a year, we have this procession of livestock coming past, which is rather special that it still happens. Because that's
Do they wear bells? Do they wear bells?
That's the kind of farming that we need to continue. Rather than fake food. But I won't go into that. So let me just share my screen.
Okay.
And then we'll slideshow, play from start. Play from start. Right, good.
There you go.
Okay, so my talk today is entitled Transcendence or Transhumanism. And I think it's a very important topic to consider at this point in human evolution. And that's how I'm going to frame it. I'm just wondering, there we go. Yes, got it. So just starting at Delphi, this is a photo by my friend Athena Potari, who's a Greek philosopher. Know thyself, that's what it said in the oracle, know thyself. And the self, in my view, is ultimately about knowing. Consciousness is about knowing. And consciousness etymologically is to know with. So our consciousness is what we know with in an immediate sense, as you are knowing and looking at this slide in this event. And then this quote from Plotinus comes from the very beginning of my good friend Ian McGilchrist's masterpiece called The Matter with Things. And it's from Plotinus when he asked this crucial question, but we, who are we? And I will argue that this is the question we really need to be asking ourselves at this point. Because if we get the answer wrong, then the consequences will be very dire, in my view. Some of you will know this book by Syed Hossein Nasser, Knowledge and the Sacred. There's Gifford Lectures that he gave in 1979 in Edinburgh. The Gifford Lectures started in the late 1800s, and the most famous set probably was given by William James, and the varieties of religious experience in 1901, 1902, and they still continue in the 4 old Scottish universities that have Gifford lectures every year. So he says this: intelligence, which is nous or intellectus, nous in Greek, intellectus in Latin, which is the instrument of knowledge within man, is endowed with the possibility of knowing the absolute. And this is in chapter 1. And that ultimate reality that is sacred as such is both the knower and the known. So this is reciprocal, the knower and the known, inner consciousness and outer reality, the pure immanent subject and the transcendent object. So this is what we need to understand as the highest form of human knowledge, which is gnosis in Greek, which is knowing that you are this one consciousness yourself and that we all are. So the question is, what is a human being? And there are 2 broad answers to this question. The first is that we consist of more than physical bodies, and we have a spirit, a soul, depending on how you define these. The immanent divine, the divine dwelling within us, is also the transcendent element in the human being. And the focus is inner. It's on consciousness primarily. And our consciousness and our being is of intrinsic value. It's valuable in itself. Then the other view can be expressed in 2 ways. First of all, that we're complex biological machines. And this arises from the mechanistic metaphor, which has dominated biology in particular, less so in physics. But it's still very, very powerful. And so that we think we invent machines and then we explain ourselves in terms of them, which is what Rupert Sheldrake calls mechanomorphism as opposed to anthropomorphism. And so we're complex biological machines. We don't work very well. We need upgrading and to be made more efficient. And this is really instrumental value. So it's a value only insofar as it's useful to something else. And this is the view taken by Silicon Valley, by a lot of neuroscientists. Daniel Dennett thinks he's a machine. He's just published his autobiography, which in my view is a contradiction to that view. And he doesn't attribute any free will to himself, but by very attributing, not attributing free will is itself an expression of free will. And I read recently that 47% of CEOs in a survey thought that AI would be a better CEO than themselves. And this again shows you a very narrow view of intelligence, because the leader in a corporation or any organization needs to have a high emotional intelligence, not just a high analytical left hemisphere intelligence. So then the other view is that we're just hackable animals. And this is Yuval Noah Harari, his book Sapiens, but he's written 3 or 4 books, but he's one of the chief advisors, and I have quite a lot to say about him, of the World Economic Forum, which I'll also be talking about. And so he thinks we're just hackable animals to be programmed and controlled using a computer and software metaphor. And this, the elites regard the masses as simply hackable animals and disposable. There are far too many of us, and it would be a good thing if there weren't so many. This, I think, is a very interesting quote. I read this article by Wesley Smith a few months ago, and he makes this very important point that Christianity's highest ideal is love. And he gives examples. John, and letters of John, God is love. Love one another as I have loved you. That also comes from John's Gospel. And hence, believers understand that Christian ethics and living requires clothing the poor, visiting the sick and imprisoned, etc., as if they were Christ. That's the whole point of Benedictine, for instance, hospitality. In contrast, Smith argues, transhumanism's highest virtue is intelligence, which is why increasing human brain capacity is the movement's second most desired enhancement after defeating death. And that's also an interesting point. And what kind of intelligence is it? It's instrumental analytical intelligence. It's not the intelligence of the heart. The heart, in fact, is completely missing from this transhumanist understanding of the human being. Now, here's quite a contrast. This comes from the work of Frédéric Apfel-Marglin, and she talks about the Renaissance scholar Pico della Mirandola from the Florentine Renaissance, who wrote as follows: all this great body of the world is a soul, full of the intellect of God, who fills it within and without, notice within and without, and vivifies the all. The world is alive, all matter is full of life. Matters on bodies or substances are energies of God. In the all there is nothing which is not God. And so this is the Anima Mundi, and she's written a very good edited book on this. So the Anima Mundi is present within all of us. It's the microcosm of the macrocosm, and the cosmos is living and sacred. And I think this is the view that we absolutely need to recover if we're going to get through our dysfunctional relationship with nature, which is characterized by the next slide, which is Descartes, which says the very opposite. There exist no occult forces in stones or plants. There are no amazing and marvelous sympathies and antipathies. In fact, there exists nothing in the whole of nature which cannot be explained in terms of purely physical, corporeal causes. Note this totally divide of mind and thought. So matter has no mind, and this is mind is distinct from matter in the Cartesian view. And so you've got a disenchanted world. This is Max Weber using this phrase, the disenchanted world. So the cosmos is mindless, and it's entirely material and mechanical. And this is the mainstream view still, that matter is primary and mind derives from matter. The physical world is also insentient, and that's being questioned now as well, especially with fungal, tree and plant intelligence. And it's closed in terms of causality. In other words, it cannot have causes outside the physical. And importantly, there's no transcendent or metaphysical realm. That's superstition. It's an illusion. And so here's a bit more about hacking organisms. So by hacking organisms, we gain the power to re-engineer the future of life itself. Notice the term engineer. And this is also a metaphor. It's a part of the mechanistic metaphor. We have genetic engineering. We have CRISPR, also based on this engineering idea. Humans are not machines, nor is nature, and you can't engineer these things without there being side effects or systemic effects. Once you hack something, you can also usually engineer it. That's one goes with the other. And so he says that corporations and government will be able to systematically hack all the people. And if they manage to do this, it'll be the greatest revolution in biology since the beginning of life 4 billion years ago. And he seems to think this is actually a good thing. I think it's horrendous. I don't want anything to do with it. I want humans to be improving themselves in different ways rather than relying on upgrades and implants. He also wrote that COVID is critical because this is what convinces people to accept, legitimize total biometric surveillance. And if you think that isn't coming, then I'm afraid I'll have to disabuse you, because this biometric surveillance and it'll be brought in the name of health, and that it'll enable us to know in advance when we're going to be falling ill or whether there are any markers that we haven't that aren't quite right. But it's the agenda is much wider than that. And so here we got these two evolutionary trajectories. So the one that I'm arguing is the reality, is the spiritual trajectory of embodying spiritual values and qualities, refining one's consciousness in terms of love, compassion, care, wisdom, integrity, and humility, among others. And it's based on theosis, the human being refining their consciousness and experiencing themselves as one with life and one with mind and one with each other. And the exemplars are the great sages and saints, and who also demonstrate superhuman abilities. And I'm going to be talking about Ben Saduno later on, and he was one of those sages who had these superhuman abilities. And I've referenced here the work of Jeff Kripal, who's at Rice University, and his two recent books, one's called The Flip, and the other is Superhumanities. And he said that humans are actually two, and this is an important point. There's a socially constructed ego and the superhuman self. And the point of spiritual life, in my view, is to transcend the socially constructed ego and move towards being an expression of the universal, this superhuman self. And here's a quote from Barbara Marx Hubbard, which I very much like. And we're evolving in the recurring evolutionary direction as individuals towards greater consciousness, freedom, and loving order. Note that, greater consciousness, greater freedom, and loving order, not imposed order, uniform order, loving order. The inner motivation of most evolving humans is towards expanded consciousness, which is why you're on this call, greater freedom, and deeper access to complex order, connecting in love. And what you could then say is that any development which doesn't actually represent this evolutionary direction is actually a devolution, not an evolution. And you can use this as a yardstick. Does this proposal bring greater consciousness? Does it bring greater freedom? And does it bring loving order with it? And I should say that Irvin Laszlo and I have got a new edited book coming out next week called The Great Upshift, which is 35 contributions from leading thinkers. And it contains everything we need to do if we're going to get through and out the other side to a new culture. Chris Beisch, he's a retired philosophy professor. Some of you may know his work. I know Betty does. And this is from his recent book, LSD and the Cosmic Mind. And he says this: I knew myself to be this single encompassing consciousness. I knew that its identity was my true identity, i.e. a non-dual sense, and how consciousness manifests itself in separate forms while remaining unified. So we are these separate forms, but consciousness that we are and which we transmit is itself unified. It's the one consciousness. And then he continues, as I expanded into what I was seeing, I was becoming larger. I learned by becoming what I was knowing. This is direct knowledge. This is gnosis. I discovered the universe not by knowing it from the outside, which is the objective third-person view, but by tuning to that level of my being where I was that thing. This is gnosis. A seamless, undivided, totally unified organic whole, a vast creative intelligence, the mind of the universe. So he's experiencing himself as the universal mind, as did a number of the new thought thinkers 130 years ago, such as transcendentalist Emerson, Thomas Troward, Ralph Waldo, Trine, and Charles Harnell and others. That's a different lecture, but it's very, very interesting. They were onto this in the from the 1860s, 1870s onwards. And then notice this epistemological certainty of this higher order of knowing. And you get this in near-death experiences and other mystical experiences, that people experience these with a sense of certainty and truth, undeniable. This is the second evolutionary trajectory in broad in broad terms. Of course, if we can use technology to achieve the spiritual path, then that's all to the good. But the reason I'm making this distinction here is that the people who are pushing this second trajectory, as I said earlier, they think we're machines and we just need to be upgraded. And so this is the merging of the humans and machines. And this is being actively promoted by the World Economic Forum, the fourth industrial revolution, it's called. And this is meant to be progress. And I would question that. And so the software upgrades are engineered through implants, but also genetics. And this is all part of the development of the intelligence services controlled biomedical security state, which has been developing steadily since about the year 2000, since the anthrax attacks, so-called. And so the control is to be exercised through biomedical security. And then we're in the middle already of what is called fifth generation warfare, which includes information war, psychological war, censorship, and importantly, narrative control. And if you look at the news recently, the COVID episode, there was a huge amount of narrative control going on. There's narrative control applied to the Ukrainian situation, and now, of course, to the Israel-Palestine situation. So the exemplar is the very clever and efficient human being. Remember that the exemplar was the sages and the saints. And what these people are effectively saying is that the sages and saints, the greatest human beings who've ever existed on this planet, didn't know what they were talking about. Everything they said was an illusion. They were totally mistaken. And we'll put all this right. And this, I think, in spiritual terms, is what's called avidya. Now we get to dataism, and this is from Harari. Dataism says that the universe consists of data flows, and the value of any phenomenal entity is determined by its contribution to data processing, and that includes us. This view has already conquered most of the scientific establishment, and the life sciences have come to see organisms as biochemical algorithms. Well, not everybody in the life sciences would agree with that. It collapses the barrier between humans and animals and machines, and expects electronic algorithms eventually to be capable of deciphering and outperforming biochemical algorithms. Now, notice this emphasis on performance. It's not emphasis on goodness, on beauty, on truth. It's just performance. Now, here's a rather chilling guidebook that I read about 6 months ago. And this is Government in 2071. So we're about 50 years out from this. And it predicts catastrophic climate change, migration, layoffs, ensuing social unrest, and the merging of humans and technology would define the next 50 years. So this is all the assumptions that the authorities and companies are trying to push us down the track. And this is the best case scenario, depressingly. Government is seen as the provider of solutions to all challenges foreseen for coming decades. This is quite wrong. And we need less government, not more. And we need to decentralize operations, localize affairs, rather than having everything controlled from the center, which isn't going to work anyway, because there'll be a breakdown on breakdowns due to complexity. And a shock is needed to spur this transition to a new world order. And there are various shocks. There was obviously the COVID shock, and now there's a climate change shock. There's the war shock. There's the terrorism shock. All of these are meant to persuade us, that these people know what they're talking about, and we should, go down their track. And here is this new religion. This is dataism. Supreme value is information flow. Can you imagine this? The supreme value, including human life, is about information flow. And life is the movement of information, which is it's a lot more than that. So therefore, we need to extend, deepen, and spread the flow of information in the universe. What about the flow of love rather than the flow of information? So there's no sacred human experiences. We're not the apex of creation. We're just tools for creating, notice the merely here, the internet of all things, and the internet of bodies, include the internet of bodies and the internet of machines, which may eventually spread out from planet Earth. God help us if it does, to cover the whole galaxy and even the whole universe. The arrogance of this is just breathtaking. The cosmic data processing be like God, for goodness sake. But God is never equated with a cosmic data processing system. God is love and wisdom and truth. It will control everything, which of course it won't, because you control machines, but you can't ultimately control humans. So this is the vision of Harari and dataism. Now let's take a break and see where's other views on this. So this is a very interesting book by Aldous Huxley, not a well-known one, Ends and Means, which he published in 1937. And he says this: it's impossible to live without metaphysics. The choice is given not between some kind of metaphysics and no metaphysic. It's always between a good metaphysic and a bad metaphysic. And then he says this rather extraordinary phrase: technological advance is rapid. He's talking about 1937. Without progress in charity, technological advance is useless. This is a critical point. We need to become better and more compassionate human beings. That's progress. Indeed, it is worse than useless, he says. Technological progress has merely provided us with a more efficient means of going backwards. Send that one round Silicon Valley and see what they say. Going backwards in ethical terms, going backwards in terms of our sensitivities, going backwards in beauty, going backwards in compassion. Whereas the ideal human being is wise and compassionate and not attached. And this reference, the reason that Merritt is in brackets is that Merritt was a professor of anthropology at Oxford, and he was arguing that progress has to include progress in ethics. And then we come to a very important point, which I'm going to talk a little bit about, which is scientism. And the C.S. Lewis in the 1940s was prescient. He wrote a book called The Abolition of Man. And then Michael Aeschliman wrote in 1999 a very important book, which almost nobody knows about, called The Restitution of Man. And what they're arguing is that this is Aeschliman, the ultimate effect of scientism, which is science as an ideology, is to dissolve the absolute qualitative distinction between persons and things. This is a very important point to note. The very heart of the metaphysical tradition, which of sapientia, which is wisdom. So reducing persons to things means denying our souls and transcendence of the physical and giving us no higher value than a camel or a stone. This reduction of the human category to the natural, notice it's a reductionism, is parallel with a whole series of reductions of quality to quantity, from value to fact, from rational to empirical. It's quite a dense sentence, this. But the point of it is that there is a prevalence of scientism, which is science as an ideology rather than a method. And then I've just said this is a very important book by Aaron Kheriaty, which called The New Abnormal. And he was in charge of the ethics at the University of California medical schools. So he's arguing here on the basis of wide reading that all the totalitarian ideologies claim to be scientific, but were in fact unfalsifiable by their own circular logic, because scientism cannot establish itself through rational argument. It relies instead on brute force, defamation, and the promise of future happiness. These are the same tools deployed by all totalitarian systems, and we're now in throes of being threatened with a digital totalitarianism, and it's behaving in the same way. So it's assumed, scientism is assumed, and if you say something often enough, people come to believe it. And careful policing of public discourse, there's only evidence supposedly supported by science, and this atmosphere is rigorously enforced, and we've seen this during the COVID pandemic. And then he quotes Auguste Del Noce about the intrinsic totalitarianism of science, and Hannah Arendt would have said the same thing. And the reason is, this is the italicized part here, that scientism and totalitarianism both claim a monopoly on knowledge. And if you look at some of the spokespeople for scientism, then they will say that it's only a matter of time before everything can be explained in these mechanical, mechanistic, materialistic terms. They you're told to believe in the system. If you don't believe in it and you speak your mind, then you're shipped off to Siberia if you were in the Soviet Union, for instance. This is Richard Falk, who is in his 90s now. He's an extraordinary person. And this was from his autobiography, which I reviewed last year, called Public Intellectual. And he's somebody who's really stood for principles and values, like my friend Alfred de Zayas, who's in a similar position as a special rapporteur of the UN. I fear that this emergent tyranny of algorithms, robots, devices, artificial intelligence, and political correctness, which is totalitarian, in my view, in the digital age, purporting to address our desires, fears, and needs, is the technologically contrived destiny awaiting humanity. So this is the second trajectory. It seems likely, and I would say certain, to erode the life of the mind, the heart, and the soul, draining life from the remnant of spirituality, awe, and mystery that has struggled to survive the onslaughts of modernity. So we need to resist this, in my view. We can't allow this just to be rolled out without any resistance. And so this is about the primacy of science or philosophy, or scientism and sapientia, scientism and wisdom. And what this quote points out is that the procedures and validity of rational thought and argument are themselves not scientific, they're philosophical. So reason is philosophical, structure of arguments are philosophical, presuppositions are philosophical. And so that's why he says science depends upon philosophy for the validity of its terms and procedures, and the determination of the uses, the ends, to which scientific knowledge will be put. And a similar point was made by, has been made by other thinkers. Collingwood's essay on metaphysics, for instance. To say that only factual statements have validity is not only dogmatic, but self-contradictory, since the statement itself is not factual. And that's an important point to understand. The statement is a statement of a philosophical position rather than a fact. And this was the whole confusion of logical positivism in the 1930s. So here's Martin Buber, whose famous book was I and Thou. We mustn't allow ourselves to be reduced to an I-it relationship with each other. We as humans have I-thou relationships also with our pets, I think. The distinction between means and ends, things and objects on the one hand, and persons and essences on the other, is at the root of moral culture and civilization. Why is this so important? Because it seems to me that this moral culture is decaying, and with it comes the decline of culture and civilization, and the fall of civilization. And I've been rereading a book this week called Immoderate Greatness by a man called William Ophuls, Ophuls. And the term immoderate greatness comes from Gibbon, Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, when he says the principle of prosperity prosperity ripens the principle of decay within the civilization. This is a real, I think it's a real dilemma for us. So humans embody something unique, which draws us beyond the physical categories into realms of meaning and value, which are logically prior to science. And unless we make value and meaning primary, then everything else will be misunderstood and misapplied. And this includes meaning and purpose. And so this is C.S. Lewis here. He says that truth, meaning, purpose, goodness, and importance are none of them scientific facts. They're immaterial relations. And so this is what I mean by having these as the primary principles. And Said, the emphasis on quantities as opposed to qualities and purposes and values and ends. So we have to understand that this realm of qualities, purposes, values and ends is not quantitative, it's qualitative. And the problem we've got is this obsession with means, with utility, with technique, with technology. And when ends and purposes have to direct these developments. And so we've got, for instance, the development of lethal autonomous weapons and human augmentation applied to soldiers, and they're without any consideration of the primary ethical questions which we should be asking ourselves if we're going to thrive as a civilization. So I put this into a chart here with the left and the right contrasting with each other. And so you can see on the one hand, we've got this idea of biological machine, hackable animals. It's secular, and we're going towards post-humanism. We just need to upgrade the software, enhance or augment the human being. This will lead to further manipulation and control. It's all to do with the head, the left hemisphere. And it's characterized as technocracy, which is the scientific engineering of human society, which was developed culturally, intellectually at Columbia University during the 1930s. And Patrick Wood is the person who knows most about this, and I recommend you subscribe to his updates. So he's not very well at the moment, so the updates are not actually coming out so frequently. And this leads to a monopolistic situation where we become slaves to the system. The right-hand side, you can see that this regards the human being as a living organism, spiritually based, cosmos is sacred. There is an element of transcendence, spiritual refinement, rather than upgrading software is what it's all about. It's enlightenment, not enhancement, and enables human beings, empowers human beings rather than controls them. It's associated, in my view, with the heart, with real democracy and partnership, and with freedom and pluralism. And there's a lot at stake at the moment. Now, here is a more complex set of columns. And what I'm arguing here is that on the left-hand side, you've got the development of technocracy, and on the right-hand side, of real democracy, participatory democracy, not representative democracy, which is corrupt. And I'm not sure how we can recover it. And so on the left-hand side, you can see that I'll just go through this quickly and give you these contrasts. So you've got a system based on force, violence, war, and coercion, out of which a great deal of money is being made. And already there's a deal signed by BlackRock for the reconstruction of Ukraine by American companies. who are making a lot of money on the war already, for $1 trillion. Contrast that with power in the sense of David Hawkins, not force and violence, non-violence and peace. And then we've got militarism and intelligence services out of control, using mind control and psychological operation, as opposed to sacrifice and power of truth. Next line I've talked about already, human as biological machine, as opposed to evolving spiritual being. Then we've got the transhuman caterpillar, where I look at it as opposed to the transpersonal butterfly. You've got an ethos of fear, separation, isolation, and division, as opposed to love, connection, and community. You've got control, surveillance, and compliance. Compliance is the new order, as opposed to freedom and critically responsibility. Freedom has to be accompanied by responsibility. You've got the Communist Party of China's social credit system, and then you've got integrity and trust. And every day I read the Tao Te Ching. And the Tao is prior even to integrity and trust. You've got realism, cynicism, and manipulation, as opposed to idealism, meliorism, which means that human beings can improve, society can improve, and inspiration. You've got an inhuman technological dystopia, as opposed to a humane utopia, represented in Christianity by the kingdom of God. You've got centralization and globalization, as opposed to decentralization and localization. You've got digital ID and health passes, as opposed to bodily autonomy, informed consent, and cash. And you've got the fourth industrial revolution, the Internet of Bodies, the Internet of Things, as opposed to what I would advocate, a revolution of love and wisdom. So here are a few quotes which reinforce the points I'm making. And the first is from the poet and Czech president Václav Havel. And you may have read this quote before, but it's worth repeating. Without a global revolution in the sphere of human consciousness, and I've emphasized this, and I still think it's quintessentially true, nothing will change for the better in our being as humans, and the catastrophe towards which our world is headed will be unavoidable. We're still incapable of understanding the only genuine backbone of our actions, if they're to be moral, is responsibility. Not just responsibility to your family, country, firm, success, but responsibility to the order of being where all our actions are indelibly recorded, and where and only where they will be judged. And you get this in the life review of the near-death experience. I can tell you more about that. And then here's the historian Arnold Toynbee saying, I don't believe the goal of true and lasting peace can be reached without a worldwide spiritual revolution. And this is an interesting statement from his autobiography Experiences, because he was also part of the Chatham House with his enormous study of history. And I think he thought world government from the top down was a good idea. And that, again, is the direction of travel. But then, on the other hand, he's advocating a worldwide spiritual revolution, the overcoming of self-centeredness in individuals and communities. And this is entirely mystical here, by getting into communion with the spiritual presence behind the universe and bringing our wills into harmony with it. This is entirely what the spiritual life is about. So that's Arnold Toynbee. And here's Albert Schweitzer on real progress. He says there are three kinds of progress that are significant. Progress in knowledge and technology, which is what we've been talking about. Progress in the socialization of humanity. And progress in spirituality. The last is the most important. Technical progress, extension of knowledge, does indeed represent progress, but not in fundamentals. And I love this phrase, and I often quote it. The essential thing is that we become more finely and deeply human. And that's what I think life's about, becoming more finely and deeply human. Here is Beinsaduno Peter Durnoff in Rila. This is a photograph of him from 1936, I think. His dates are 1864 to 1944. And the reason I'm bringing him in, is that the importance of his key principles here. And the first principle is that of love, bringing the impulse to life. The second principle is wisdom, bringing knowledge and light to the mind. And the third principle is truth, which frees the human soul from bondage. And he says this: there's nothing greater than these principles. There's no straighter or surer path. In these principles lies the salvation of the world. Now, you might think that's quite an arresting statement, but the fundamental values, the meaning and purpose that I've been talking about, these principles embody what we need to be striving towards. And in addition, you've got justice as the fourth one, and virtue or goodness as the fifth one, making the pentagram. And so he says that love is life for the whole, love in a metaphysical sense. All beings form a whole as branches and leaves, the great cosmic tree. This is the basis of equity. And this is what Lewis Mumford talks about when he says it distinguishes between a trajectory of mechanical uniformity, which is the fourth industrial revolution, and so on, and unity and diversity, which is the way of nature. And so he says, and I believe this too, life is one, mind is one, love is one. Hence the supreme goal of human lives, that people should be free and they should serve love, wisdom, and truth. That, to me, that's what my life is devoted to, serving love, wisdom, and truth. Then he says, and this is all in a book which was articulating some of his politics. He says there are three kinds of life: life for oneself, that's selfish life; life for society, for others; and life for the sublime principle. So life for oneself is the law of the part. Law of the majority, of the neighbor, is life for society. And life for the sublime principle is the law of the whole, of the divine. And so you can either serve yourself, you can serve society, or you can serve God. If you serve God, you're also serving yourself and society, but not the other way around. And towards the end of his life, he issued an extraordinary prophecy, and we are in the middle of this process, I think. The Earth, solar system, universe, all being put in a new direction under the impulsion of love. Most of you still consider love as an insignificant force, but in reality it is the greatest of all forces. Money and power continue to be venerated. He said this in the 1940s, as if the course of your life depended on it. In the future, all will be subjugated to love and all will serve it. But it's through suffering and difficulties that the consciousness of the human will be awakened. And this, I think, is my kind of regrettable conclusion, at least insofar as I understand things, that we learn through suffering, applies individually and collectively. And although we know what kind of society would be a thriving society in which people are free to serve love, wisdom, and truth, this is not what's on hand at the moment. But this is the direction we need to be moving in. And so my vision is based on the oneness of life and consciousness, on spiritual awakening, both individual and collective, and regeneration of Earth systems. I think this is incredibly important because all the reductionist focus on single factors, such as CO2 emissions, in terms of the climate debate, it ignores the systemic and the organic nature of the Earth and organic systems. And so everything needs to be regenerated. And if we regenerate, including ourselves, I should add, if we regenerate the Earth, regenerate soil, regenerate the air, nature will help us regenerate the fish. Then that's, to me, is the only way forward. And so this is Dunov again. Humanity is moving towards collaboration, mutual aid, and union. I think that's correct. The question is knowing how to harmonize liberty and the collective, liberty and solidarity in the individual and society. They seem to be mutually exclusive, and they're harmonic, and this is an important part of the thesis. Their harmonic coming together is the higher idea of humanity that can only be attained through life for the whole, i.e. through love. And so this life for the whole is a fundamental notion that is the basis of Dunov's politics. And so I think we need to move from the love of power to the power of love. The love of power is the New World Order. You've heard that phrase frequently, the Great Reset. And this is based on fear, militarism, violence, separation, control, division, surveillance, manipulation, exploitation, servitude, and mechanical uniformity. The power of love is based on harmony with the earth, fraternity with each other, service, mutual aid, the golden rule, non-violence, justice, peace, life for the whole, and overcoming evil with good, and organic unity, as Mumford would say. So this is my book of poetry, which I published, and I'm going to read you two poems from which I've written this week, and I'm just going to, and they're within the context of this. I'm not up to date with today's news, but they're within the context of the Israeli-Palestine situation. So let me just go to those. The first one is called The Dispossessed of Gaza. Dispossessed, displaced, dismembered by powerful forces planning imposition behind closed doors. Carved out, carved up, fenced off, neighbors were estranged from living on the land together. Subjected, subjugated, submerged, gasping for space, these neighbors now survive apart. They now survive in fear. Tensions build, weapons brandished, rising defiance, resistance, and riposts. Clamping down, closing in, bottling up, ignites a powder keg of rage on either side. The shadow is other, the other is shadow. Not I, the righteous one, but you, the accused, the despicable, the despised, the destitute, the undeserving. How do we right such wrongs? How do we confess our share of guilt? How do we defuse such griefs of history? Not through resentment, not through revenge, not through recrimination, neither through retaliation. Only a new beginning will bring an end to such recurring cycles of violence. Only a new beginning. Only by means of truth, only by means of justice, only through empathy, only through feeling the other's pain, only through forgiving the unforgivable, through pardoning the unpardonable, through excusing the inexcusable, only through our common humanity, only through peoples rising up together, then speaking truth to power, only through declaring that enough is enough. Enough of war, enough of violence, enough of suffering, enough of sorrow and grief. At this crucial point of choice, at this turning point of destiny, surely our children, surely our children's children deserve no less than this, to live in peace together. I think I'll just leave it at that because I might dilute the effect if I then follow it up with the other poem, but I could maybe read that at the end.
That's a very powerful poem. Let's see, is that's in your book, The Candle?
No, I wrote it this week.
Oh.
No, I've written a lot actually in the last month.
Well, it's only, you make reference to Israel and Gaza, so it couldn't be it couldn't be published yet. Do you think you could send that to me and I'll send it to the
Yeah,
attendant?
sure, I will, and then people can you
Great.
can send it round.
Yeah, I love
And the other one, which is a response to, I don't know how many of you have seen this call, not in um, no in my name, no vengeance, by Mikhail Halef, who lost her son in the Hamas attack.
mm,
It's absolutely, if you're not moved to tears by her appeal, then I
mm.
don't think you're fully human. And so you can look that up, but I'll maybe read that at the end. But let's maybe have some questions.
Okay. So one of the questions that I had is in your preface to the book, to the New Renaissance book, you talk about control of the government by corporate interests, which is promoted by the World Economic Forum. How can we transition from this insatiable desire for perpetual growth to a more sustainable post-growth economy? Do you have any ideas? I think it, if we compare it in two columns to spirituality, or not even spirituality is kind of a charged word for some people who may not believe in God, but they believe in goodness and truth and beauty. So I hesitate to just narrow it to that. But I think that when growth of the person, whether or not they see it as spiritual, I see it as spiritual, but not everyone does. But growth in compassion, growth in evolution as a human being, as that beautiful quote by Albert Schweitzer. When that's not happening on the inside, that gets externalized, right? And then everything has to grow on the outside. I often think that if we were growing on the inside, if we were finding the depths of our own nature, our own human nature, which is, in my mind, spiritual, but that we would not be so driven materially, right? So I think it's that lack on the inside that produces the demand for growth, ever, perpetual growth, economic growth, material growth on the outside. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think the existing system has growth built into it, or its aspirations have growth built into it, and that in the long run it simply isn't sustainable.
Yeah.
And the if the indigenous tribes who survived for as long as they did so by remaining in equilibrium with their surroundings. And a lot of civilizations have crashed from ecological overshoot. So then in Central America, the Aztecs was an example of this. And they're cutting down the forests and over exploiting the land. But now we have succeeded in doing this on a global scale. And we've used up since 1945, we've used up half the total resources ever used up by humanity up until 1945. And this is called the Great Acceleration. Since 1945, we've used, we've probably now it's more. We've used more than half the total resources that have ever been used. So that kind of puts it in an evolutionary context. And I think that at the end of last month, Helena Norberg Hodge and Vandana Shiva and other Satish Kumar, they organized a localization summit in Bristol. And I asked them whether they were going to produce a sort of statement or manifesto, because there needs to be forms of words that we can get around and support. So in the UK, we have the Transition Town movement, which is doing a lot of this kind of work. And I wrote a piece last year called, sort of Call for Revolution of Love, and I'm going to be working more on that going forward, for the reasons I've explained. And so we do actually need a new economics and a new financial system, and one that where things are sufficiently devolved, so that they aren't all centrally controlled and then create too much complexity. So I think scale is actually crucial here, that we need to be moving things into a smaller, more localized scale, and as an approach, as a principle. And then the great things in life, the happiness are very simple. Walking with your dogs, cuddling up with your cat, or your human, going for walks in nature, sitting around a nice warm fire if you're lucky enough to have one, which I'll be lighting later on. And it is, I just put in a sort of an amusing quote here from Coco Chanel, and she said that the best things in life are free, but the next best are very, very expensive. She should know. But I think this aspirational of trying to outdo people, it's all produced by a book I'm just in the process of reading to review. I don't know whether anybody in the call knows this book. It's called The Christ Letters, and it's absolutely extraordinary book. About what calls the truth of being and the laws of existence. And you can understand, if you have some background in things, that what Christ, the message is coming through is actually what Jesus said when he was alive, but it was misunderstood both by his followers and eventually by the church. And so he was turned into another sacrificial lamb, when he said the whole point is to develop and refine your consciousness and make contact, living contact with divine reality. So I do agree that I think if you have a rich inner existence, then your need for outer reinforcements is very much reduced. But basically, we need a new economics and the new economics foundation and others. We need a new agriculture. We need regenerative economics, regenerative everything, as I've been suggesting.
And is there a movement? Somehow, I can't see that coming from government.
No, totally not. No,
Right.
No, it won't. It can't, because government's all about centralization, regulations, laws. The government should be, if you look at the derivation of the word government, it comes from gouverner, which means to steer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's the function of government. Government should give steers rather than try and control and regulate everything under the sun. And you don't encourage responsibility by telling everybody what to do all the time. And I think we need to become more responsible in that sense. So I don't think it's going to come from the top down. It's not going to come from the corporates who are only interested in furthering their own interests. It has to come from the people, and that means us. It's bottom up, grassroots. But we need somehow to coalesce into a much more coordinated, coherent movement than we currently are.
That's the ticket. That's the challenge. Yeah. And how do we do that? Now, there are many points of light, I call them. There are many organizations like your scientific and medical network and Caritas and many, many others. that are all talking about and thinking about these same things and the same changes that need to be made, but we need some kind of coalescing factor. I mean, the internet would obviously be key for that. But yeah, it's just
well, I think it is happening, but a lot of it's happening under the radar.
Yeah.
But because the mainstream media is owned by those same corporations who are trying
Right.
to bring their own agenda forward.
Mm-hmm.
And the technological people, it's all one system, if you like. And so we need to develop these alternatives and operate, I think, through this, and Dunov mentioned this, through this principle of mutual aid. Because mutual aid, mutual support means that what we ask ourselves, what can we do for our neighbors? What can we do for our families? What can we do for our circle of influence? And that isn't necessarily about, the big things that you do on the world stage. It's much more to do with building that sense of community, which has been lost.
Yeah.
And which, if that's really what we thrive on. I mean, we are social beings. We need each other. We need each other's support. And that's how and so when we're cut off from each other, then we don't thrive.
Yeah, I suppose if I think about it in terms of morphogenetic field, Rupert Sheldrake's morphic field, we are connected, just not on a conscious level, maybe. So
no, well, I think we are, and I think we are power. One. I think we are one consciousness.
Yes,
and I think to the extent that this idea becomes more everyday currency, as it were, then we will begin to realize. I mean, I'm reading a book on intelligence of trees at the moment.
Yeah.
Actually, with reductionist biological techniques, people were able to see for themselves the underground connections there between trees, and also fungal intelligence, which Merlin Sheldrake has done a lot of work in. And so this idea of distributed intelligence, that we are nodes in a larger network, and that to me implies that we should be looking after each other. Today, we shouldn't be exploiting each other. We should be looking after each other. And our happiness is enhanced by doing that, not by exploiting and by living for oneself and the part, as Dunov would say.
Yeah. Edna put something in the chat. She said, my background is economics. Therefore, I see that scientism goes along with opportunities for capitalism. People can invest in expanding the machine and selling advanced machines. So entrepreneurs would like this philosophy as it provides them with opportunities. Likewise, government goes along. Comments?
Yes, I think that's a very good point. And in May, I went to London for the coronation, because with my connection with the king, I thought I should be there, to celebrate this. And I wrote a poem about that as well. And I was sitting in a street party next to a hedge fund manager, and he started telling me that they were looking for environmental projects in which to invest, and it then made me realize that the whole structure of investment and return means that only sort of innovations that you bring in that are going to make money are viable investments. And so if you were to say, well, let's invest in regenerating local communities, or regenerating the soil, or regenerating bio ecosystems, and there was no monetary return, then you can't, within the current system, invest in it.
Huh.
You
Yeah.
can invest in it as a philanthropist, and by giving grants, and so on. But in terms of return, it struck me that the system is sort of stacked against it, even for a well-meaning hedge fund manager like my friend I was sitting next to. So that was a kind of aha moment for me, because I realized that he can't do other than what the system incentivizes him to do. And that, then who's going to do it? Because a lot of the investments in farming, for instance, they're investments in the big industrial agriculture, in meat-free substitutes, and so on. So we actually need to be investing in the earth and in regenerative systems, but I'm not sure that there's a system for doing that. So I think it's a very good question.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else?
Oh, Zach Bush, absolutely. He's fantastic on every level, both and spiritually as well as. So yes, do look at Zach Bush, and he's a physician, but he's got a very, very important environmental project, or series of farming projects.
Ah, that's good to know. I always just thought of him as a doctor.
No, goodness, no, he's got something called Farmer's Footprint.
Huh.
No, so that's well worth looking up.
Okay, making note of that. Anybody else have a question? I have several. So, Jen, I just happened to be able to see you, but I don't see everyone at once. So try to use the raising your hand. But go ahead, Jen.
Hi, Gloria. I would just like to comment that one of the tools that I think is being underappreciated is education for young people, to be curious, to encourage them to be curious. And what I find very threatening in the world right now is the limitations being put on certain methods of teaching, that but there seems like a very active agenda to control what's being taught. But if how we resist could be done by instilling the great gift of curiosity, that's how knowledge becomes absorbed through children and through growth as they get older. It could be things as simple as when you go to like a craft fair, and you're walking along, you're taking a child and walking along and asking the craftsman, well, what inspired you to choose this? What did you like about this? There's a wonderful segment on CBS on some mornings. I can't remember the name of the commentator, but he has his child sitting next to him and another child sitting across from them at another desk. And the children get to ask questions of the people that have done something really special with their lives, that have to do with being very kind to others. And it stimulates. It seems like watching those children enjoy what they're talking about is wonderful. And it's done with a little sense of humor. So you can tell that that's been cultivated in those two children. But I think that that's something that has to be broadly approached in order for people to find ways to resist, and putting technology aside and going out in the world, especially of nature,
Yes.
especially with animals, especially with other people. If we could just instill that curiosity as part of education.
And there's a whole section of this book on education, on
Oh,
how we need to improve education. And a lot of it you have talked, matches what you're saying. about curiosity. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, and I think we're in a similar situation to the economics. There's a lot of alternative ideas about education, but they're alternative. What is emphasized by the current systems is passing exams, which means memory, rote learning. And then if you can reproduce everything in an articulate form, then you get an A.
Yeah.
And then you get into university where you can then memorize even more. So I do think that there's also, if I bring Ian McGilchrist into this, that most of education and indeed society is based on these left hemisphere instrumental approaches, where it's the right hemisphere that is imagination and intuition, and that curiosity is allied to that, and so that's the sort of very fundamental level at which we need to be rectifying the balance between right and left hemisphere, and creativity as well is a function of the right hemisphere. In order to write my poems, I have to sit in a state of receptivity and expectation, and then I'll get an image, and then I try to translate that image into powerfully emotive words and rhythms. But if I had no capacity to receive, I wouldn't be able to write anything at all.
Yeah, I've been following Ian McGilchrist. I love his work.
I'll maybe just mention one other thing, because I had a major educational project which I ran for about 15 years, which was originally called Learning for Life. And then it finished up as Inspiring Purpose. What I provided a template for young people to think about, what their strengths and shortcomings were, who inspired them, and what they wanted to do with their lives, and how they could contribute to the greater good. And we had hundreds of thousands of children participating in this program, which is not currently being operated there because we don't have any funding for it at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But inspiringpurpose.org.uk is the website.
Okay. Well, I mean, there is still Waldorf education, but it's, that is definitely a balanced left brain, right brain mode of education that Rudolf Steiner came up with, which is...
No, very much. Absolutely.
Yeah. But, it's the exception rather than the rule. Let's see. I wrote down a quote, and I forgot to write down who said it. But I got it from your book somewhere. And it said, if we have created our existing dysfunctional systems, we are surely capable of recreating them with different intentions, values, and principles. And it reminded me of a quote by Isabel Hickey, whom I like, where she said she had been in a very negative state for a long time, and a friend of hers pointed it out and blaming everyone else, and the whole thing. And she realized, she said she had this awakening, and she realized, if I can create hell for myself, then I can create heaven. And I just thought that was such an important concept, because we feel often so helpless in the face of all these issues that we're talking about, but we created them. And if we can create them, we can create the opposite as well.
I think that's, the essence there is co-creation, I think.
Yeah.
And so it's collaboration, cooperation, how we can cooperate with each other, both individually and as organisms and organizations, on a common human future, and not one that just uses buzzwords. Because the problem with the Sustainable Development Goals is they sound great on the surface, but until you then dig in and see what actually they involve.
Yeah.
And they're not a truly humane future, which is why I keep coming back to the important individual quality or quality of the individual human being and our relationships. That seems to me critical.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else have a question or a comment? Jane must have dropped off and is coming back. Anyone else have something to ask or something to contribute to this discussion?
Yeah, I have a question.
Oh, yeah, Susan.
Yeah, what's the name of the book on intelligence of trees that you're reading? And is this one of the books that's addressing the mother tree? You know, and her.
Now what is the? Do you know? It's downstairs. I'll have to let Gloria know, and then she can let you know. I have 100+ books in the pipeline at any one moment.
There's one book that came out called The Secret Life of Trees.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking.
It's not that one. No,
it's not that one.
A new one. This is a new one, which is about the sort of distributed intelligence. And, if we could be more like trees, then our world would be a more harmonious place.
Does that include standing still?
I would think so.
Yeah.
The 3 principles, that's Dunov. That's Peter Dunov, Deunov.
Yeah. I liked your appendix where you, in the book, where you named the 9, what was it? The 9, let's see. Oh, I don't see the term here. Oh, the 9 questionable assumptions. And I thought that was very concise. It covered a lot of territory. And I guess you covered a lot of it in your talk as well. But yeah, let's see. Where you mention the historian Arnold Toynbee, his premise that new cultures and worldviews emerge as a response to the challenges of wide-reaching crises that require unprecedented solutions. This also is depicted in Spiral Dynamics.
Yeah, no, I know about that.
Yeah, where each level of consciousness emerges as a solution to the pathology of the previous level. So every level has its benefits, its solutions, its benefits, and then it also, as it goes along, it develops pathologies, and when those pathologies become extreme, as they are now, I believe, then it gives rise to another level. It prompts a kind of a leap in consciousness to the next level.
I think that's broadly true. And it's where we are at the moment. We're stuck in old memes, though. Yeah. We're stuck in the orange and the red and the green
blue.
and the blue. Yeah.
The blue.
But when in fact we need to become integral and move into the second tier. As Ken Wilber and others have been arguing.
Right.
But that's all to do with the evolution of consciousness, you see. Yeah. And that's track 1 of what I've been talking about this evening, which is the evolution of the human being, towards a more integral, compassionate, wise form of who we are and who we can be. As I was saying, I mentioned that if we only apply the egoic, both at national, individual levels, structure of consciousness to our issues, then nothing fundamental would change. And so you have to have a new level of human being in order to have a new level of human society. But I mean, if I take Toynbee as an example, he talked about the creative minority, and this was used in Fritjof Capra's 1980 book, The Turning Point, because Capra read, and it was also taken up by by other people, Paul Anderson, is that right? Paul Anderson. Yes, and the cultural creatives, this idea of the cultural creatives. And so what we've been talking about this evening is the new culture that's trying to be born, a wiser culture, a more regenerative culture, a more healing culture. And it's the grass shoots that are coming up, but they're currently not favored by the existing system, which is trying to keep itself in place. And there's a huge amount of power and investment there going into the existing system. And our efforts are very poorly funded, relatively speaking.
Well, money isn't everything.
No, I mean, we can do what we can do.
There's external power, and there's
internal,
there's authentic power, which is not recognized by, governmental and other institutions. That is, in Power versus Force by David Hawkins. He talks about that. And I think that we just have to remember where the real power is. I think we project as a culture, as a species, even these days, we project all the power. We tend to project it externally on authority, governmental authority, on money, on status. But we have to remember where the real power lies, and that's not where it is. Yeah.
Yes, I do think that the world systems have all been run along similar value lines. And in the Gospel of John and the Gospel of Beloved Companion, which is a Mary Magdalene Gospel, they talk about the Prince of the world. And if you think of Jesus' temptations, he was taken up to the top of a mountain, and he was given these 3 temptations, by the Prince of the world. And so the people who understand things more deeply are never a majority; they're always a minority. But we can be that creative minority, as I'm suggesting.
Yeah, and it doesn't take a majority to reach.
No, the creative minority is responsible for initiating the new, explaining it, and then beginning to get other people on board.
Mm-hmm. And somewhere I read, and I don't remember the number, but somewhere I read that the whole Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, was actually just a handful of people. I mean, very small number. Do you know what that number was?
Yeah, it wasn't. I have read a number, but I can't imagine. Yeah. But it was very, very small. It was
very
a few
small.
People.
I was amazed. So that gives me hope.
Well, also I think there is this notion of an idea whose time has come.
Yeah.
And I think that there are a lot of ideas whose time has now come, to enable us to move into a new set of systems based on different values.
Yeah. Yeah. There is a time constraint because of the climate crisis and the nuclear threat. So that's the only factor that is perhaps not in our favor, but I don't know. Edna says there's a slow money movement which is trying to invest in the good, I don't know about its success. Do you know anything about that?
No, that's new to me. But
Tosh.
well, I love things that are slow.
Yeah,
Slow food.
yeah,
If you don't go slowly, you miss a lot.
yeah. She says Woody Tosh is the founder of the slow money movement. So I don't know anything about that. Edna, would you like to tell us a little bit about it?
Farming and food.
Farming and
That's all I
food.
know about it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for, I'm going to look into that. Let's see. What else do I have here? Is anybody else? I think there was something else in the chat. Let me see what that was. Oh, Maria asked, how do we recognize or discern use of technology for good versus evil? Example, paralyzed man able to walk again or speak again as a spiritual being. Should they accept their condition as an opportunity or lesson to learn from the experience and resist returning to prior human condition? I would say no.
No, let me just comment on those two things, because there's Kropotkin book as well. We've got a chapter on mutual aid in the Great Upshift that's coming out this coming week, and by Gauthier Chapelle, who's the collaborator with Pablo Savine. These are French thinkers, and they've got a book about 2 years old called Mutual Aid: The Other Law of the Jungle. It's a very, very good book. I reviewed it. So that's that point. How do we discern the use of technology? Well, again, what I've been suggesting is that we have to put ethics in the primary position, and asking what the intentions are, what the purposes are. And I think there's an element of Trojan horse here, because a lot of these innovations are introduced as medical innovations, and then they're repurposed. And that I think is a problem. I mean, like Neuralink, for instance, and there are some technologies that enable people to move limbs that they couldn't move before, and obviously everybody would support that. But I think we just need to be very careful about the sort of smoke screen sometimes of a medical innovation, which is then used to justify something else. So I think we need to understand what the overall motivation is of the people who are bringing in these kind of innovations, and also think creatively about how we can interface with technology and apps and so on. I mean, the apps for meditation, there's all sorts of different apps which are positive, but there's no real substitute for human live interaction.
Yeah, there were a couple of books that I read by I'm trying to think of Norman Deutsch.
On the brain.
Yeah, on
Yes.
the brain that heals itself, and then the second one, and it had a lot of those technologies that advance, healing and compensation for, enabling a blind person to see enough to navigate without any kind of cane. There were a lot of very inspiring books, those two books. There were a lot of examples of technology being used to help people with handicap.
Well, I think we're all supporters of that.
Yeah.
And that seems to me self-evident.
Yeah. The problem with technological advancement, especially, the military technology, is that it has outpaced our collective emotional and, even spiritual advancement, which is what makes it so dangerous. And, if we could only pause it until we can accelerate our collective evolution of consciousness, before.
Well, Toynbee said exactly that in 1975. And what I call this the wisdom gap. The gap between the wisdom required for the technology we have and the wisdom we actually,
Yeah.
the wisdom we exhibit. And Steiner, I think, said, knowledge of higher worlds, that you need to take two steps forward spiritually and ethically for one step technology. And I suspect, I don't know this, but I think that this archetypally, I think that it's possible that the Atlantean civilization destroyed itself through technology, through this very same wisdom gap. And Pete Russell's got a new book called Forgiving Humanity, which argues that a technological species with exponential technological progress will eventually extinguish itself. It's a pretty, it's quite a thesis, but I think there's a lot in what he has to say. And we should be pondering this. We should be pondering how we can renew ourselves culturally and from a values point of view. Because if we don't do this, when you look at I was reading today in Christ's letters about the degradation of entertainment and the amount of violence that is now even in routine films. I can't watch these routine films anymore because the background level of violence is so great. I find it a violation.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do it. And so this is a desensitization process.
Yeah.
And you see this in society as well, with rising levels of violence. When everything is the Hollywood, industrial output, has been making this all more and more sophisticated.
Yeah.
And we're destroying ourselves, morally and spiritually. That was the argument.
Yeah. Well, I think the desensitization is a real thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a lot of these, drones are operated from computer screens. So the military drones, people who actually, do the operation, they're doing it somewhere in the Pentagon, and then they press play, as it were, and then something explodes and there's a human life gone. And it's like a video game.
Yeah, it's no more real than a video game, except for the people who are being.
Exactly. This is where, in the 1950s, Einstein and Schweitzer and Bertrand Russell, were part of the movement to question nuclear weapons. And they had this very memorable phrase, which applies to us now, I think. Remember your humanity and forget the rest.
David, tell us, before we conclude, tell us a little bit about the scientific and medical network that you.
Well, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary this year.
Wow.
The network was founded in 1973 by some senior academics and vice chancellor of Surrey University, senior civil servants. And the reason it was founded was that it was thought that science was being submerged in materialism, and that young doctors and scientists are being trained to think in this exclusively materialistic fashion. And all the founders of the network had mystical experiences. And so they knew there was a reality behind the physical reality, which we needed to know about and communicate. And so that we've been operating at this interface between science, consciousness, and spirituality, for the last 50 years. And specifically, we have our Mystics and Scientists conference in April. We've got Beyond the Brain coming up in 2 weeks' time. So beyondthebrain.org, you can join in, and you get recordings if you're in the inconvenient time zone. And then we have our Galileo Commission, which is to expand the science of consciousness beyond a purely materialistic approach. And we've got a synchronicity summit in the afternoon, so that's fine for US participation. So you need to go to galileocommission.org to find out more about that. And yeah, so that's really, and I edit a journal. If you're a member of the network, then you receive the journal in hard copy, and it comes out 3 times a year. And then we have webinars every week. So on a Wednesday. So we've got spiritual intelligence and AI is actually the topic for this coming week. Should be interesting.
That should be interesting. Well, a lot to think about. You've given us a lot to think about, and I'm so happy that you joined us today, and the work that you're doing and the books that you're writing and editing. It's an amazing contribution. Thank you so much for joining us, David.
Well, thank you. And maybe I'll just finish by reading the second poem.
Oh, yes, please do. Yes, please do.
So this one's called Not in Our Name. And I was mentioning Michal Halef, the mother whose son was murdered by Hamas. And if you look her up on YouTube, you'll find this 2-minute 36 clip.
How do you spell her last name?
Halev, Michal Halef. I'll actually, let me just put that whole thing, I'll put that into the chat before I read the poem. So I'm going to do that now. Chat. Paste. There you go. So that's that. So let me just read this poem, Not in Our Name. The mothers, the grandmothers, carry each generation in their wombs. They nurse, they cherish, they love, they sacrifice, they support, they comfort and console in the hearths of home and community. Their hearts aglow with warmth, their eyes shining with radiant kindness. But now they can only weep and wail. Their sons lie lifeless before them in pools of seeping blood, their lives shattered, their hearts wrenched in agony. Who will hear their piercing screams? Who will hearken to their searing cries? Who will listen with their souls ajar? Between the heaving sobs, angels of peace alight on their shoulders, whispering oh so softly in their ears. Gentle mothers and grandmothers, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Blinded by the rage of oppression and injustice, living by the sword, they can only die by the sword, for violence begets violence, hatred begets hatred, war begets war. So dare to declare this unthinkable wisdom, comes from the Sermon on the Mount. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Do good to those who hate you, for love begets love. Forgiveness begets forgiveness. Understanding begets understanding. Such is the strength, the vision, and courage of love. This dreadful cup of bitterness we have drained to the dregs, to the depths of our broken hearts. We cannot wish such crushing anguish as we have endured to be visited on other mothers and grandmothers, not in our name. In our name we want no vengeance, this deadly poisonous pattern of reciprocal pain and mutual reprisal, perpetuated down the echoing centuries, not in our name. We lend our name instead to healing. We lend our name to care and love. We lend our name to peace. Shalom, salam, shalom, salam, shalom, salam.
Beautiful.
Hebrew and Arabic for peace.
Yeah.
That's what came to me at the end.
Yes. Fitting and Yeah. There are a lot of people thinking of who are Jewish, who are calling for peace, and
Well, we all need to. I mean, this is the system,
yeah,
and the division and historical injustices, and they apply around the planet, and a lot of them go back to colonialism, and the history of colonialism, and the subjugation of peoples and slavery, and this is we're dealing with the fallout of all this, and the power relations, and the attempt, to impose a unipolar order on the world instead of respecting this diversity and unity.
But as you mentioned earlier, it's a result of the prominence and the emphasis on the left brain
And patriarchy.
and
the
patriarchy is a result of that also, right? And there was a time, prehistory, where we were more balanced. It was a participatory, cultures that honored the sacred feminine, honored both sides of the brain. And if we did it once, we can do it again.
This is what we need to recover.
Yeah.
Anne Baring and Betty have been arguing.
Yes, and Anne Baring and Veronica Goodchild. It's and that is, I think, our science, when we learn about evolution, well, Darwinian or even, I don't know, but it's always this timeline that starts with the caveman and keeps getting better, and it doesn't include this, the prehistoric, and they're finding out more and more through archaeological digs about these civilizations. And I think we need to really
the women of the world need to come together and rise up.
Yeah.
Say no more. The women of the world and the feminine principle needs to come forward.
Yeah.
Because Dunov said 100 years ago, only women can end war. They're the mothers, the wives, the widows. And so I think there needs to be an enormous international movement of concerned women. Because the men are not going to sort it out.
The Dalai Lama says it too, that he said the world will be saved by Western women.
Yeah, well, why? Let's do
it.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. Well, we're trying.
And I will support it to the hilt.
Yeah.
With my feminine principle.
Yeah. Carol is mentioning, as the women in Liberia, I was telling the story about
and the women in Iran.
Yeah, that too.
The Peace Prize just went to a woman in Iran, and
but the women in Liberia who got rid of Charles Taylor, that was a very successful movement. They elected a woman president and everything. They forced peace talks. They forced him to go to have a peace talk with his opponent, with his, and they surrounded the building where they were having the talk, and they said, "You're not coming out until you've figured out a way of having peace." And
that's what we need. We need organized women's sieges of government buildings.
Yeah.
All the ministries of defense.
Yeah.
All the CIA, the MI5, MI6, the Five Eyes, all of these outfits. They need to be told where to get off.
Yeah. Okay, to be continued, I guess. Did you want to say something, Carol, real quick?
No, can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, I lost my visuals, and as you know, Gloria. But anyway, this was wonderful. I'm so happy that I was able to attend this presentation. Thank you so much, David and Gloria. Thank you.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, David. Well, thanks again from me. And And I hope you'll join us again.
Good night, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
You too. Bye.